Motorcycles have always symbolized freedom, rebellion, and raw speed. But sometimes, manufacturers pushed the limits so far that governments around the world had no choice but to step in. From machines that were too fast for their own good, to two-stroke beasts that choked the skies with smoke, to bikes so loud they shook neighborhoods, these motorcycles were deemed too dangerous, too polluting, or simply too wild to be allowed on public roads. Some were banned outright, others heavily restricted, and a few became legends precisely because of their forbidden status. Today, we're counting down 11 motorcycles so extreme, so controversial, that they were banned worldwide. Number 11. Kawasaki Ninja H2R. If there's one motorcycle that embodies pure, unrestrained insanity, it's the Kawasaki Ninja H2R. Introduced in 2015, the H2R wasn't just another superbike. It was a technological weapon designed purely for the track. With its aerospace-inspired design, carbon fiber wings, and a supercharged engine that roared like thunder, the H2R quickly gained notoriety as the most powerful production motorcycle ever built. At its heart lies a 998 cubic centimeter, supercharged inline-4 engine producing an eye-watering 310 horsepower, which can climb even higher with ram air assistance. To put that in perspective, most high-performance superbikes hover around the 200 horsepower mark. The H2R didn't just raise the bar, it obliterated it. With a top speed pushing 250 miles per hour, this machine wasn't just fast, it was terrifyingly fast. So much so that no public road on Earth was truly safe for it. That's exactly why the Kawasaki H2R was banned from road use worldwide. Unlike its street-legal sibling, the Ninja H2, the H2R was never certified for emissions, noise, or safety compliance. Its exhaust note is deafening, registering well over legal decibel limits. Its sheer speed and lack of road equipment, like mirrors, headlights, or turn signals, made it a track-only machine. Even in racing, the H2R feels excessive, often described by riders as overwhelming and almost impossible to fully tame. Owners who manage to get their hands on one face additional challenges. The H2R is so powerful that it requires specialized tires, constant maintenance, and an expert-level rider just to keep it under control. Kawasaki themselves warned that the H2R was not intended for casual riders, but for professionals capable of handling its monstrous performance. And yet, the H2R's banned status has only added to its legend. Enthusiasts view it as the ultimate forbidden fruit of motorcycling, a bike so advanced and unhinged that governments worldwide agreed it simply couldn't share the roads with ordinary traffic. In many ways, the Kawasaki Ninja H2R exists less as a motorcycle and more as a statement. It's proof of what happens when engineers are allowed to go completely wild, without worrying about regulations. And while it will never legally touch public asphalt, it remains one of the most feared and respected motorcycles ever created. Number 10. Suzuki GSXR 750. The Suzuki GSXR 750 is one of the most iconic sport bikes ever created, a machine that helped define the modern superbike era when it debuted in 1985. Lightweight, razor-sharp, and packing serious horsepower for its class, the GSXR 750 became a legend on both the track and the streets. But its reputation as a performance beast also led to controversy, restrictions, and in some cases outright bans in different parts of the world. What made the GSXR 750 such a target for regulators was its balance of raw speed and affordability. Unlike exotic superbikes from Europe, the GSXR 750 was relatively affordable, which meant more young riders could get their hands on one. The combination of a high-revving inline-4 engine producing over 100 horsepower in a lightweight chassis made it dangerously quick in the wrong hands. In markets like the UK and parts of Europe, the bike was often associated with high accident rates, which gave it a reputation as a hooligan machine. Noise and emissions regulations also created problems. Early versions of the GSXR 750 were criticized for being too loud, especially in countries with strict decibel limits. Later, emissions crackdowns in the 1990s and 2000s forced Suzuki to heavily modify the engine to meet regulations, which in turn led to temporary sales restrictions in certain regions. Some countries even banned imports of specific GSXR 750 models until they were modified to comply with local laws. Another factor was insurance restrictions. In markets like the UK, insurance companies flagged the GSXR 750 as a high-risk motorcycle, charging premiums so high that it effectively banned ownership for many young riders. In a sense, while governments didn't always outlaw the bike outright, the financial barriers and restrictions around it made it nearly inaccessible for the average rider. Despite these challenges, the GSXR 750's legend only grew. On the racetrack, it dominated middleweight superbike categories, and on the street, it inspired an entire generation of riders. But the very qualities that made it great — lightweight, screaming power, and edgy handling — also made it feared by regulators. That's why the Suzuki GSXR 750 earns its spot on this list. It wasn't banned everywhere in every generation, but across different eras and markets, its wild reputation and non-compliance with noise and emissions laws forced authorities to step in. For enthusiasts, that only added to its allure, because nothing says legend like being too fast, too loud, and too raw for the streets. Number 9. Kawasaki Ninja ZX-11. In the early 1990s, the Kawasaki Ninja ZX-11, also known as the ZZR 1100 in some markets, wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a revolution. For 6 straight years, it held the title of the world's fastest production motorcycle, capable of reaching a staggering 176 miles per hour. At the time, no other street-legal machine came close. It was the king of speed, a crown that also made it a prime target for regulators around the world. The ZX-11 packed a 1,052 cubic centimeter inline-4 engine, producing around 150 horsepower, paired with advanced aerodynamics that made it shockingly stable at high speeds. For riders, it was exhilarating, smooth, powerful, and terrifyingly quick. But for governments and insurance companies, it was a nightmare. The ZX-11's top speed pushed beyond what many considered safe for public roads. Combined with rising accident rates among sport bike riders, it quickly earned a reputation as a machine too fast for the street. In Europe, particularly in countries like France and Germany, lawmakers began imposing restrictions on the ZX-11. Some versions were sold with speed limiters, capping the bike at lower maximums to prevent riders from unleashing its full potential. In other regions, import bans and stricter licensing rules targeted high-performance bikes like the ZX-11 directly. Insurance premiums skyrocketed, effectively pricing the bike out of reach for younger riders. The controversy around the ZX-11 also helped trigger the so-called Gentleman's Agreement in 1999. where Japanese manufacturers agreed to cap the top speed of production motorcycles at 186 miles per hour, 300 kilometers per hour, to avoid stricter government crackdowns. While the ZX-11 itself was already fading out by then, its dominance and notoriety played a huge role in sparking that international agreement. Owners loved the ZX-11 for its blistering speed and long-distance touring comfort, but regulators hated the risks it posed. As a result, the bike was often restricted, banned in certain trims, or heavily penalized with costs and limitations in multiple countries. Today, the ZX-11 is remembered as one of the most important sport bikes of the 1990s. A machine that pushed the boundaries so far, lawmakers had to step in. Its legacy isn't just speed records, but also the global restrictions it inspired. That's why it earns a spot on this list. A motorcycle too fast for its own good. Number 8. Yamaha RZ500. The Yamaha RZ500, also known as the RD500LC in some markets, is one of the most legendary two-stroke motorcycles ever built. Launched in 1984, it was essentially a street-legal version of Yamaha's Grand Prix racing machines, a no-compromise sport bike packed with raw power and race-inspired technology. Riders adored it, but governments didn't. Its wild two-stroke engine, aggressive nature, and heavy emissions made it one of the most restricted and banned motorcycles in the world. At the heart of the RZ500 was a 499 cubic centimeter V4 two-stroke engine producing around 88 horsepower, an astonishing figure for its time. Weighing just under 450 pounds, the bike was blisteringly fast, with razor-sharp handling and the ability to hit over 140 miles per hour. For enthusiasts, it was a dream come true. Finally, a GP-style racer for the streets. But for regulators, it was a nightmare. The biggest issue was emissions. Two-stroke engines, while lightweight and powerful, are notorious for burning oil along with fuel, producing clouds of smoke and high levels of pollutants. By the mid-1980s, many countries, including the US, had begun cracking down on two-stroke street bikes. As a result, the Yamaha RZ500 was never officially sold in the US, and in other markets, it was eventually banned or restricted from importation due to failing to meet emissions standards. Beyond pollution, the RZ500's reputation for being difficult to handle also drew concern. Its peaky power band meant that below a certain RPM, it felt tame. But once the revs climbed, it delivered a sudden and explosive rush of power. For inexperienced riders, this made the bike dangerous and contributed to its controversial status. Despite these restrictions, the RZ500 became a cult classic. Enthusiasts went to great lengths to import them as gray market bikes, often modifying them to meet local regulations. Today, surviving examples are highly sought after, not just for their performance, but for their outlaw mystique. The Yamaha RZ500 is remembered as both a triumph of engineering and a victim of tightening regulations. It gave ordinary riders a taste of Grand Prix racing, but burned too hot, too smoky, and too dangerously for governments to tolerate. That's why it lands at number 8 on our list, a motorcycle so wild it was banned almost everywhere it went. Number 7. Suzuki RG500 Gamma. If one motorcycle perfectly embodies the phrase, "a race bike with lights," it's the Suzuki RG500 Gamma. Released in 1985, the RG500 was a street-legal version of Suzuki's dominant Grand Prix racing machines, And like its Yamaha rival, the RZ500, it quickly gained a reputation as one of the most thrilling and dangerous bikes of its era. That thrill, however, also made it one of the most banned and restricted motorcycles worldwide. Under the seat sat a square 498 cubic centimeters two-stroke engine, producing around 95 horsepower, a staggering figure for the mid-1980s. The RZ500 weighed only about 340 pounds dry, giving it an incredible power-to-weight ratio. In the right hands, it could rocket past 140 miles per hour, carving corners with razor precision. In the wrong hands, it was a recipe for disaster. The RZ500's biggest issue was its explosive power delivery. Like many high-performance two-strokes, it had a narrow power band. Below a certain RPM, it felt docile, almost underwhelming. But once the revs climbed, the bike delivered a violent surge of acceleration that could overwhelm inexperienced riders in an instant. Many early accidents gave it a reputation as being too much bike for the streets. Emissions and noise regulations sealed its fate. Two-stroke engines spewed unburned fuel and oil, producing thick smoke and high pollution levels. As governments worldwide tightened standards in the late 1980s, the RZ500 became an easy target. It was banned outright in the US and eventually fell under strict limitations in Europe, making legal ownership nearly impossible in many regions. Another factor was insurance. In markets like the UK, insurers slapped the RZ500 with exorbitant premiums due to its accident history and reputation as a widow maker. This, combined with limited availability, effectively priced it out of reach for most riders. Despite these bans, the RZ500 Gamma became a legend. Enthusiasts adored its raw, uncompromising character, and today, collectors pay high prices for rare surviving examples. Its outlaw status only adds to its mystique. The Suzuki RZ500 wasn't just a motorcycle. It was a race bike that somehow slipped onto public roads. Too fast, too smoky, and too dangerous for regulators, it quickly became one of the most banned machines in history. That's why it sits at number 7 on this list. Number 6. Honda NR750. The Honda NR750, unveiled in 1992, is one of the most fascinating motorcycles ever built, and also one of the most controversial. Nicknamed the Oval Piston Bike, the NR750 wasn't banned because of reckless riders or raw two-stroke pollution, but because it was so advanced, so unconventional, and so difficult to regulate that many countries refused to allow it on public roads. At its core, the NR750 was a technological experiment. Instead of traditional round pistons, Honda developed oval-shaped pistons that effectively allowed each cylinder to act like two. This gave the bike 32 valves and 8 connecting rods in a 750 cubic centimeter V4 engine, producing around 125 horsepower. It was cutting-edge Formula One-inspired engineering, brought to 2 wheels. The problem? It was too advanced for its own good. The bike's unique engine design didn't fit neatly into existing regulatory categories. Homologation standards for racing and emissions testing couldn't easily classify it, and in some markets, it was simply denied approval. On top of that, the NR750's high-revving engine and unconventional mechanics made maintenance incredibly expensive. Honda only produced about 300 units worldwide, each costing the equivalent of nearly $60,000 in the early 1990s, astronomical at the time. Some countries also banned it from racing outright, arguing that its engineering gave it an unfair advantage. Ironically, Honda built it to showcase innovation, not to dominate sales, but regulators treated it with suspicion. In places where it was technically road legal, insurance costs and service restrictions made ownership impractical. The NR750 also suffered from its timing. By the early 90s, emissions rules were tightening, and this high-strung experiment wasn't designed for efficiency. Its exhaust note and performance leaned more toward a prototype than a practical road bike, reinforcing regulators' reluctance. Today, the NR750 is considered one of Honda's greatest masterpieces, a rolling piece of engineering art. Collectors prize it not just for its rarity, but for its outlaw status. It remains a symbol of what happens when innovation races ahead of regulation. That's why the Honda NR750 earns its place at number 6, an engineering marvel so unique it ended up being banned, restricted, or simply priced out of existence almost everywhere. Number 5. Kawasaki Z1. When the Kawasaki Z1 burst onto the scene in 1972, it instantly changed the motorcycle world. With its 903 cubic centimeter four-cylinder engine producing nearly 82 horsepower, the Z1 became the most powerful production bike of its era and could top 130 miles per hour, making it the fastest motorcycle money could buy. It was Kawasaki's answer to Honda's groundbreaking CB750, and it didn't just compete, it blew it out of the water. But with great speed came great controversy. In markets around the world, the Z1 was quickly viewed as too loud, too powerful, and too dangerous for everyday roads. Many countries with strict motorcycle laws at the time moved to limit or outright ban the bike. One of the biggest issues was noise. The Z1's four-cylinder exhaust had a sharp, aggressive roar that exceeded decibel limits in several regions, forcing Kawasaki to fit quieter exhausts, or watch the bike be banned outright. Even then, riders often swapped them out for aftermarket pipes, bringing noise complaints right back. Another problem was power regulation. In Europe, countries like Germany and France imposed horsepower caps on motorcycles in the late 1970s and 80s. The Z1, far exceeding those limits, was restricted or flat-out banned from sale unless detuned. For governments, the combination of raw power and inexperienced young riders created an unacceptable risk. In the UK, the Z1's reputation as a hooligan bike fueled insurance crackdowns. Premiums skyrocketed, and many younger riders simply couldn't legally insure it. Effectively, the bike was banned not just by law, but by the financial system surrounding it. Yet despite all the restrictions, the Z1 became a legend. Riders adored its combination of speed, reliability, and aggressive styling. It paved the way for the superbike era, and its rebellious reputation only made it more desirable. In many ways, the bans and restrictions made it an outlaw icon, cementing its place in motorcycle history. Today, the Z1 is remembered not just as a groundbreaking superbike, but as one of the first motorcycles to be targeted worldwide for being too much machine for its time. Governments may have banned it, but riders elevated it to legendary status. Number 4. Ducati 1199 Panigale. The Ducati 1199 Panigale, launched in 2011, was hailed as one of the most advanced superbikes ever built. With futuristic styling, MotoGP-inspired engineering, and blistering performance, it instantly became a dream machine for enthusiasts. But for regulators around the world, the Panigale was less of a dream and more of a nightmare. So much so that it was banned or restricted in multiple markets. At the heart of the 1,199 Panigale was Ducati's 1,198 cubic centimeters Super Quattro 5 twin engine, pumping out an astonishing 195 horsepower while weighing just under 165 kilograms, 364 pounds, dry. This insane power-to-weight ratio made it one of the fastest production motorcycles of its time, with top speeds pushing well past 180 miles per hour. But that kind of performance came with consequences. The biggest issue was noise and emissions. The Panigale's signature exhaust note was deafening, often exceeding legal decibel limits in Europe and Asia. Some countries banned certain aftermarket exhausts outright, while others refused to certify the bike in stock form until Ducati modified it. In Switzerland and parts of Germany, the Panigale became a target of noise restriction laws, effectively banning it from certain areas. Another controversy was safety. The Panigale's raw performance, combined with its aggressive riding position, made it extremely difficult to control for inexperienced riders. Accidents involving the bike led to insurance companies in some regions classifying it as high risk, with premiums so steep that ownership became nearly impossible. For some riders, this financial ban was as restrictive as any government law. Even in racing, the Panigale caused headaches. Its engine configuration and extreme output raised questions about fairness, leading to regulatory debates in superbike competitions. Some leagues imposed additional restrictions just to keep it balanced against competitors. Yet despite the bans, the Ducati 1,199 Panigale's reputation only grew. For riders, it represented the pinnacle of Italian engineering: fast, beautiful, and unapologetically loud. For regulators, it was a symbol of excess. That's why the Ducati 1199 Panigale lands at number 4. It wasn't just a motorcycle. It was a challenge to the rules themselves, a machine so powerful and so loud that governments had no choice but to step in. Number 3. Kawasaki ZZR 1400/ZX14. The Kawasaki ZZR 1400, also known as the Ninja ZX14 in many markets, is one of the most infamous speed machines ever created. Introduced in 2006, it was built with a single purpose: to dethrone the Suzuki Hayabusa as the world's fastest production motorcycle. And it succeeded. But that success also drew the attention of regulators worldwide, leading to bans, restrictions, and one of the most unusual packs in motorcycle history. The ZX14 was powered by a monstrous 1,352 cubic centimeters inline-4 engine, producing nearly 200 horsepower. With advanced aerodynamics and Kawasaki's engineering muscle, it could reach top speeds of around 186 miles per hour. This wasn't just performance. It was a direct challenge to speed limits, and it reignited global concerns about motorcycles being too fast for public roads. The controversy wasn't new. Back in the late 1990s, the Suzuki Hayabusa had already triggered panic among lawmakers for breaking the 190-mile-per-hour barrier. By the time Kawasaki released the ZX14, pressure from European governments, especially Germany and France, was mounting. Regulators feared that a speed arms race between manufacturers would lead to uncontrollable machines on public roads. The result was the now famous Gentleman's Agreement among Japanese manufacturers. Starting in 1999, and continuing into the ZX14 era, companies agreed to electronically limit production motorcycles to 186 miles per hour, 300 kilometers per hour. While the ZX14 was capable of far more, its top speed was capped to comply with the agreement, avoiding outright government bans. Even with this limiter, however, the ZX14 was restricted in some markets. In parts of Europe, horsepower caps forced Kawasaki to detune the bike, while insurance premiums in the UK made it nearly impossible for younger riders to afford. In other regions, emissions and noise regulations further limited availability. Despite these hurdles, the ZX14 developed a cult following. Riders praised its incredible stability at high speeds, smooth ride, and comfort for long-distance touring. But its reputation as a forbidden fruit machine, too fast for regulators, too extreme for everyday roads, cemented its place in motorcycle history. That's why the Kawasaki ZZR 1400/ZX14 takes the number 3 spot. It wasn't just banned or restricted, it became the poster child for a global speed war that governments fought to control, leaving riders with a bike that was both legendary and controversial. Number 2. Honda CBX. The Honda CBX, launched in 1978, remains one of the most outrageous motorcycles Honda ever produced. With its massive 1,047 cubic centimeters inline-6 engine hanging dramatically out of the frame, the CBX looked more like a piece of mechanical art than a standard motorcycle. It was loud, powerful, and intimidating. A machine built during the Superbike arms race of the late 1970s. But while enthusiasts loved it, governments and regulators didn't. The CBX quickly earned restrictions and outright bans in some regions, mostly due to its noise, emissions, and sheer excess. The CBX produced around 105 horsepower, making it one of the most powerful motorcycles of its time. Combined with its 6-cylinder smoothness, it delivered an intoxicating rush of speed and refinement that few rivals could match. But the bike's distinctive sound was also its biggest downfall. The CBX's 6-into-2 exhaust system unleashed a high-pitched scream at full throttle, often exceeding legal noise limits. In Europe, especially in Germany and Switzerland, strict decibel laws led to outright bans on certain CBX exhaust systems and heavy restrictions on imports. Emissions were another problem. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, governments were beginning to crack down on pollution, and the CBX's big carbureted engine struggled to meet the tightening standards. In some markets, Honda had to pull the bike entirely, making it unavailable for sale. Practicality, or lack thereof, also played a role in its controversial status. The CBX was enormous and heavy, tipping the scales at nearly 600 pounds wet. Combined with its brutal power delivery, it wasn't a forgiving machine for inexperienced riders. Insurance companies in the UK and Europe slapped it with extreme premiums, effectively banning it for many younger buyers. Despite the bans and restrictions, the CBX developed a cult following. Riders adored its wild personality, iconic engine, and the fact that it represented an era when manufacturers built machines simply to prove they could. Today, the CBX is highly collectible, with clean examples fetching premium prices. That's why the Honda CBX lands at number 2 on our list. It wasn't banned because it was unsafe or unreliable. It was banned because it was too loud, too polluting, and too extreme for regulators to tolerate. In other words, It was everything a motorcycle fanatic could ever want. Number 1. Kawasaki Ninja H2 Street Version. When Kawasaki unveiled the Ninja H2 in 2015, it sent shockwaves through the motorcycle world. A street-legal bike with a supercharged 998 cubic centimeter inline-4 engine, producing nearly 200 horsepower, and even more with Ram Air. The H2 was unlike anything riders had ever seen before. While the track-only H2R was banned everywhere outright, even the street version faced serious regulatory backlash, with bans and restrictions in multiple countries. What made the H2 so controversial was its supercharger. Until then, forced induction had been reserved for experimental models or racing prototypes. By putting it on a street bike, Kawasaki created a machine that could accelerate like a rocket, reaching speeds well over 200 miles per hour. For regulators, this was simply too much performance for public roads. In Europe, noise and emissions standards immediately became a stumbling block. The H2's distinctive supercharger whine and aggressive exhaust note put it over decibel limits in countries like Switzerland and Germany. Some regions restricted its availability, while others banned certain aftermarket exhaust setups outright. Emissions compliance was another headache, and Kawasaki had to continually update the H2 to keep pace with tightening rules. Insurance and safety regulations also targeted the bike. In the UK, the H2 was flagged as a high-risk machine, with premiums so steep that they effectively banned it for many riders. In Australia and parts of Asia, licensing laws prevented younger or less experienced riders from ever legally owning one, citing its extreme power-to-weight ratio. Despite these restrictions, the Ninja H2 became an instant icon. Its futuristic styling, trellis frame, and mirror-like paint job made it stand out as much as its performance. For riders who managed to get their hands on one, it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, unlike any other production motorcycle. But its legend is also tied to its banned status. The H2 proved that even in the modern age of regulations, manufacturers could still build something so outrageous that governments were forced to step in. It wasn't just a motorcycle. It was a statement that engineering ambition could still push beyond the limits of the law. That's why the Kawasaki Ninja H2 takes the #1 spot on this list. It's the ultimate forbidden superbike. Fast, beautiful, and so extreme that entire countries decided it had no place on their roads. Motorcycles have always pushed boundaries, but as we've seen, some machines push them a little too far. From two-stroke beasts like the Yamaha RZ500 and Suzuki RG500 to superbikes like the Ducati Panigale and Kawasaki Ninja H2, these bikes were so extreme that governments had no choice but to step in. Whether it was deafening noise, choking emissions, or speeds that made regulators panic. Each of these motorcycles became legends, not just for their performance, but for being too wild for the streets. Now, we want to hear from you. If you had the chance, would you ride one of these banned motorcycles? Or do you think the bans were justified?